Were there other things that were required of you around the experience?
The specific, like, rabbi-approved white square cloth that you need to insert inside of yourself twice a day following your period. And also you need to wear white underwear and use white sheets on your bed during that time.
Whoa.
Any hint of blood, then you need to start over and count 7 clean days before you're allowed to touch your husband again.
Hey, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cult to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions and organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. As always, if you're only listening and you want to see our faces, go to my YouTube channel where you can like and subscribe at Cult to Consciousness, if I didn't mention, and you can join in on the conversation. I love interacting with you in the comments. I do my best to respond to everybody. So today's guest, I poached this guest from Andrew Gold's channel after we did an episode together. I came across her story and it is a beautiful one and an important one. So this is someone who grew up in an extreme Orthodox sect of Hasidic Judaism run by her grandfather. And we're just going to dive into what it was like for her growing up in that way, having children, and eventually leaving, and how she's dealt with the repercussions of that, and now how she's choosing to raise her children differently. So thank you so much for joining us, Chavie Weisberger.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's so good to be here.
Of course. Did I pronounce your name right?
You did, as close as you're going to get, I think.
Okay. Okay. I'm doing my best. Yeah, so your interview with Andrew was so beautifully spoken and so well done. There were just some things that I wanted to dive into deeper, such as the purity culture. I also grew up in very strict purity culture, but not as extreme as yours. I know it's a very vulnerable topic, so I want to say thank you in advance for being so vulnerable and open and sharing your stories, because I know it's something that is not easy to do. So I think to start off, I would love to give everyone kind of an overview of Hasidic Judaism, and also whatever disclaimers you want to give personally, because I'm not an expert. I'm also very new to this and learning. So what is Hasidic Judaism, and what was it like in your specific group?
All right. So I feel uncomfortable like speaking about topics that I'm no expert in. I just know, having lived it, what that experience was like for me, but I'll do my best. There's like several different kinds of Judaism or ways people practice Judaism. So there's like the Reform movement, the conservative movement, and the Orthodox. The Orthodox is divided into these different levels of devoutness, I guess. So there's like the modern Orthodox community, and then there's the ultra-orthodox community, which encompasses both the yeshivish community and the Hasidic community. The yeshivish have a lot of similar values as the Hasidic. They're also very sheltered from the world and quite fundamentalist, but they focus more on Torah study, and the Hasidic community focuses more on serving God with joy, I suppose, or different aspects of serving God. I'm bad at this. All this to say, research it. It's interesting. I should probably do research it now that I'm out of it. But the Hasidic community is, like you said, very varied. It's not like there's one specific leader that tells all Hasidic Jews how to live their lives. It's actually like so many different sects. Mm-hmm. And most of the sects began in Eastern Europe, like pre-Holocaust. In some rare cases, one I'm very familiar with, my grandfather founded a Hasidic community after the Holocaust here in America. So he was a teacher at a yeshiva that was not Hasidic, and some of his students were interested in his style of teaching and his values, and they kind of flocked around him to learn more and to understand his way of being, and it was more of a Hasidic focus. And so they kind of anointed him their rabbi, and he started a sect called Emunas Yisrael, which literally translates into faith of Israel. And that's the sect I was raised in. And it's similar to many of the other sects and also has its own little things that are unique to it.
Yeah. Okay. So I know in your interview you mentioned you were kind of sheltered from the world. So paint us a picture of what that actually looks like day-to-day life? Are you required to dress a certain way, act a certain way? Are there things that you can and cannot watch or look at? How does it differ from some of the other sects of Judaism?
So in my experience, we were very, very sheltered. So no TV, no movies, no books that were written by people who weren't Hasidic. Yeah, and it was very, very strict. And even like in school, the books we used were not traditional textbooks. Actually, when I was younger, we did, and then they got more like devout as I got older, and they started producing their own textbooks because of like some content that they didn't want us having access to. So when we did use the secular textbooks, they would censor them, so they would like cross out things that they didn't, like words like library were crossed out in my textbook. Yeah. And we weren't allowed to go to the public library, which is why they censored it. So completely sheltered from anything that might give you an idea of what's happening, how other people are living their lives, what's happening in the world. And to answer the broader question that you asked, like the day-to-day is very, there's just every single facet of your life is controlled. So like from the moment you wake up, there's, a basin with water, a cup of water in it that you prepared the night before near your bed. And you need to like wake up, recite a certain prayer, wash your hands in a very specific way before you even get off your bed. There's the right way to put your shoes on, the right way to tie your shoes. Everything you wear is very controlled. So like for boys, you probably know the traditional Hasidic garb: white shirt, black pants, black long suit jacket, black hat, sideburns. And it's like very controlled. And for girls, it's strict modesty. So, covered like your neck to your wrists, skirts past your knees, thick tights that cover your legs, and even styles and fashion is very controlled. Colors, which colors you can wear. Everything is about like conformity and modesty.
Oh, why would they control the different colors? Were there certain colors that they, I guess, looked down on, or was it just so everyone kind of was in the same color palette?
It's modesty reasons. So they didn't want you wearing anything bright, or, red was forbidden, neons, bright colors, things like that.
Was it because it would draw too much attention to yourself?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh. And how early were these modesty standards implemented as a kid?
So that's actually one of those odd ones, because it is specific sect to sect. And the more strict sect, the one I was raised in, starting at 3 years old. So little girls until they're 3 years old can wear whatever they want. And then at 3 is when the modesty rules start to kick in.
Oh, that's a lot to unpack there, because it makes you think, why is modesty important to a 3-year-old, and what that message is sending to children about their bodies. And I would imagine it would make you feel, it would be a little bit scary and make you feel uncomfortable if, and I don't know, maybe you can fill us in as to what they were telling you when you were a child as to why you had to cover up. At least in Mormonism, they do, I would say, as early as the parents want, but you're kind of made to follow modesty rules once you become a young woman, which is around 12. So when I was going through adolescence, I remember thinking I had to be modest because I was causing men to have impure thoughts about me. And when you're that young, you don't even really understand what that means, but it makes you feel really uncomfortable, like people are always watching you and you have to stay pure, and it's just very icky. So how was that explained to you as a child, having to cover up so young? Did you ask those questions?
So it's interesting because I hadn't really thought about this before. Because it starts so young, they don't tell you it's about men when you're 3 years old, right? They say it's about looking like a proper daughter of God, whatever that means.
Okay.
You're a daughter, you're royalty, you're a daughter of the king. Would a royal child be dressed so inappropriately? There's that framing. And then, but as you get older, there is all of the like conversations about boys and men and being careful not to be immodest around them. So it's definitely also woven in there. And because it's, like I said, it starts so young, it's just kind of always there on your consciousness. And I actually have an interesting, a fun little story about that,
Okay.
because let's get personal here for a minute.
Okay.
I think I was like just a weirdly clueless kid. I just kind of was just going through life. Everything was confusing. I didn't understand most of what was happening. I was just floating through it all. And I did learn about sex when I was like, I think in 8th grade. My classmates, someone read it in the dictionary, someone was telling somebody else, and I was cool enough to be in on that conversation. So I knew like the very basic idea of like what the anatomically happens during sex. I was very disconnected from it. Like it was just this weird piece of information I had that I knew was dirty and inappropriate.
Yeah.
When I was engaged to be married, fast forward to that part of my life, and we can always go back if we're missing important bits. I was 18 years old. I was, going to marry this man that I didn't know. And prior to marriage, they send the girls to something called a kala teacher, which is someone who prepares you for marriage. So there's like a series of lessons right before the wedding that you learn about all the laws of family purity, which are like super intense, about when you're allowed to have sex. But actually, they don't talk about that immediately. So it's more like there's all the different things you need to know about husbands and wives touching each other. During your period, you're impure. You're not supposed to be touching each other. After your period, you have all these like different rules about like 7 days after your period, you need to prove that you are completely clean of your period for 7 days. So there's this little white cloth, the specific like rabbi approved white square cloth that you need to insert inside of yourself twice a day. I think it was twice a day. I might be missing. I forgot. It's so long, but I think it's twice a day leading up, following your period. And also you need to wear white underwear and use white sheets on your bed during that time.
Whoa.
And the point of all of this is to say that if there is any hint of blood, then if it's ascertained to be period blood, then you need to start over and count 7 clean days before you're allowed to touch your husband again, or your husband touch you.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's a lot of pressure for you. And also putting it on that young woman that she is unclean during her period. There's already so much a taboo around menstruation and us women not feeling comfortable even talking about it. But it's so natural and normal that without it, we wouldn't even have childbirth. So I can't imagine that extra layer of making you feel unclean. How did that make you feel?
It was awful. I just want to be clear. It was absolutely awful for me, although we're going to get a lot of pushback on this because there's more discourse around this now in Jewish spaces where they're pushing back on the term of unclean, or, they're just saying it's a ritual purity. It's all the same. When I was in it, it definitely felt dirty and shameful and bad. So I just want to preempt any of that discourse happening here. It was a very stressful thing, and I resented it so much. But I want to stay on track to just finish this story because I feel like I just took you off on a tangent. All this to say, I'm at this Kala teacher. She's teaching us all these rules about, what to expect at the wedding, and the final, not what to expect, what the rules are for marriage. And the final session with her is the sex talk. And this is when young girls learn for the first time what actually happens in married life. Many girls know beforehand, like myself, or have heard, through different ways, but that's officially when you're supposed to learn about it for the first time. And boys do the same thing with something called a chassan teacher, where they're being taught what the boys are supposed to learn. So I was at this Kala teacher. She was giving me the talk, and while I thought I knew everything before then, I suddenly realized like there's a big gap in my knowledge. And I don't know if this is too vulgar to say on your podcast, but I
Nothing is
asked
too
her,
vulgar.
this is great, best time ever. I asked the college teacher, the how does the man's penis know to get hard at that time when you're actually doing the deed?
Uh-huh. Valid question.
Right? And suddenly it was like, wait, like this is so important. I never like this. How does this happen? And so she explained to me that when men are very visual beings. When they see something that they're excited by, the blood rushes to their penis and it gets hard. And for me, that was like this huge aha moment where I finally understood why modesty existed in the first place.
Oh.
And I remember just running home like from that lesson and like grabbing my younger sister and like hiding in a room with her and being like, I understand everything now. Like, you know, this is why we need to hide from men. And this is why, you know, because their penises get hard when they see us. And it felt so revelatory.
I mean, you're not totally wrong, but can you imagine if just, I mean, you know, if there's just guys walking around with hard penises all the time because someone's wearing a tank top, like it's not that sensitive. Well, who knows? I'm not a man. I can't speak for penis owners. But
what I can say though, and this relates very much to this like purity culture theme, is that the more like men are repressed, the more that is true, right? Like the less they have permission or access to allow themselves just to like be in the world and see people, the more they're sensitive to the very littlest things. So kind of,
yes,
yeah, it's all connected.
That is such a good point, and I'm glad that you brought that up. So what are your thoughts? Because, okay, there's so many questions I want to ask here. The first being, were you excited about this at all, about having your first sexual experience? Did they even explain about female pleasure and how to physically get your body ready to accept a man? What's going through your mind while you're preparing to get married? And I assume it's an arranged marriage. You said you don't know the person.
I was not excited about it at all. I was terrified. Nothing about it felt like good to me. I was grossed out and very turned off by the whole thing. Although like that's very specific to me. I have talked to other girls or women who say that for them it was very exciting and they couldn't wait for sex with their husbands. For me, it was like, this is a stranger. I barely know him. Men in general, I was just really turned off by men. And also a separate piece that might be specific to me is that I had been sleeping with girls for several years at that point. And so I didn't understand though that what I was doing with girls was the same act as the thing that was going to happen in marriage, just with different anatomy. To me, it was like, I have this intimacy with girls and I love it. And we just love each other so much and like touching each other. And when I get married, there's this very specific act I need to do with my husband that is about his pleasure. They were not related things to me. Like I didn't have language for the thing I was doing with the girls. So like, it just felt like this other thing that was like not exciting, not hot.
Yeah. That brings up an interesting point around not knowing that they were comparable. And the thing that I can relate to is I was never explained what masturbation was for women. I just always knew that that's a guy thing and don't do it and it's wrong and sinful and whatever. And then once I figured out what it was, I was like, oh yeah, I've done that before. I had no idea that I had been sinning this whole time. And was it similar to you? Do you think if you would have explained what you had done with other women that you would have been punished for it or looked down on for it? And did that ever happen? Did you ever tell anyone what you had been doing?
So I absolutely would have gotten in trouble for it. I did get in trouble for it at summer camp one year. The director of the camp called me into her office and told me, you're not allowed to be kissing girls. And I don't know who ratted me out, but that was the framing. Like you can't be kissing girls. And I was like, oh, okay. But I knew it was bad. I knew it was immodest, you know, and that it felt shamey and wrong in that sense. But But if I had been sleeping with boys as a teenager, I would have been like absolutely punished, and it would have been seen as cardinal sin. So it's
Mm.
interesting. It's almost like this weird loophole because women's sexuality, it doesn't exist. Like we're just not seen as sexual beings. And so it's like, that's not right. It's dirty, and bodies should be hidden and shameful, but not you're like having a sexual act outside of marriage level shameful.
Oh, that's so interesting. In Mormonism and most other Christian denominations, being gay is seen as an abomination towards God. But if you're saying that sexuality didn't necessarily exist for women, did they view what you were doing as the same serious type of sin, or is being gay a sin, an abomination to God in your religion?
Being gay is an abomination to God in my religion. For
Okay.
men. For men.
Okay.
For women, it's actually interesting because nobody talks about it. It's just not a thing that's even addressed. Not gay men either. Like none of it is talked about. I only learned about the fact that being gay is a sin after I left the community. When I was in it, there was just nobody mentioned it at all. But when I was questioning, like after my divorce and my struggle to figure out like what's next for me, there was a period where I was trying so hard to figure out how do I stay within Judaism and still be true to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I reached out to this rabbi who was actually like a modern Orthodox rabbi, because I knew I can't even ask this of a Hasidic rabbi. But I was like, maybe a modern Orthodox rabbi will give me some, sense of like permission to be myself and remain in Orthodoxy. And the rabbi said, no, I'm not allowed to be pursuing, a sexual relationship with a woman, and it's forbidden. And I was like, well, then what does God want from me? He said, God wants you to be celibate for the rest of your life. If that's the only way you can get sexual pleasure, you should just be celibate.
That makes me so angry. And that's the same for Mormonism. They're like, oh no, we accept gay people. You just can't be gay. It's like, wait, what? You can't act on it. You just have to get married, force yourself into a straight marriage and have children because that's what God wants for you. So okay, I'm going back a little bit. We're kind of popcorning, which is great to get a broader scope of everything. So when you are having these sexual experiences with women and now you're being forced to marry a man that you don't know, how did you feel when all of that was going on? Like during your wedding and after the wedding and the things that you're expected to do, what's going through your mind and how are you rectifying this?
It was such a difficult time for me. And, like as time passes, I like discover new layers of what that actually felt like for me. I think I was just a zombie in it all. I was like just, kind of going through the motions and feeling really detached from myself. But it was a really bad time. When I got married, like I said, my husband, I had met him like twice for an hour each time before being engaged to him. And in those conversations, it was just like him telling me like stories from the Torah, or like what the weekly Torah portion was about, or like what he was studying in yeshiva. It was not like a human conversation. And then, I was told that we should get engaged. Specifically, like after the first time I met him, my father asked me, so do you like him? Do you like him? And I said, no. And he said, okay.
Oh, no.
And I went back to the sleepaway camp I was at, with all the girls I was kissing. And my father called me up and said, would you do me a favor and just meet him one more time for me? And I was like, okay. Came home, did the whole thing again. My father asked me, do you like him? I said, no. And he said, well, do you respect him? And I said, yes. He seems to be a very good Torah scholar. And my father said, respect is enough and you'll learn to like him. And we were engaged. And, 6 months later, we got married without having like any like conversations or, any real connection in between. And on the wedding night, I was expected to have sex with him.
Yeah.
And not only, was it my first time having sex with him who was a virtual stranger to me, but it was my first time being like intimate with a man,
Yeah.
period. And because of like modesty culture, there was just so little exposure to like men and boys in general. Even my own brothers, like I just didn't know men.
Mm-hmm.
The boys are in yeshiva all day. They're like living this very separate life from their sisters. And so it was like so many layers of like shock for me,
Yeah.
to be this intimate with a person with who's a man. And that night I really felt violated. And, people ask like, did he rape me? And like, no, not technically. It was really hard for him too. Neither of us wanted to be there.
Mm-hmm.
But I experienced it as a rape. I felt like the way I describe it is like the community and the rabbis raped me,
Oh.
by having no concern for what that experience might be like for the person who's actually expected to go through with it. And that was super traumatic. And then after the wedding, there's these 7 days of celebrations called the Sheva Brachos that we're like every night after the wedding, you have like these dinners with family and community members in different people's homes or catered or whatever. And during this period, you're never allowed to be alone because of some belief that I don't want to mess this up, but I think it's something about like the bad spirits are trying to attach themselves to you because it's such a holy time. There's something there. I'm probably messing it up, but there's some reason. And so you need to kind of like, if you're ever alone without your husband, somebody needs to be there with you during that week. So like a sister or a sister-in-law would like babysit me during that time. And so I just remember like I was so deeply traumatized from what had happened to me on the wedding night and could never be alone in my thoughts because there was always either my brand new husband who had that like horrible experience with me, or
Yeah.
his sister or his mother or people I can't talk to about it.
Yeah.
And it's not like I'm never alone to even like call a friend and try to process it because there's always somebody there. And I'm expected to go every night to these parties and put on this happy face and be like, oh my goodness, we're celebrating you.
Yeah.
And I just remember that this one night I was looking around at my sisters and I was so angry with them because they're married and they have gone through this thing and they didn't do anything to warn me or protect me from this.
I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been to force yourself into that position. And you said that he didn't really want to experience that either. Was that something that was required of you following the wedding?
Yes. So there's something called yichud, which is this concept of like a man and a woman are never allowed to be together unsupervised or without like alone, unless they're married, and marriage is only like valid once it's been consummated.
Oh.
And so you're expected to do it the wedding night or else you're not allowed to live together.
Wow. Were there other things that were required of you around the experience? I'm trying to gauge the level of, I guess, religiosity around that experience other than the obvious.
Yeah, now that you mention it, oh gosh, there's a whole bunch of them. So this is a part where I do want to put out a disclaimer that it's different for every different sect. And even within the sect, everyone has their own stuff. Like it's just so nuanced. And because people don't really talk to each other about it, there's just everybody's experience is very different. My ex-husband was very, very devout and very anxious about being devout. He wanted to do everything 100% perfectly by God. And so it led to situations like this being extra traumatic because, for example, there is a rule that you're not allowed to have any like sefarim, which are like holy books, in the room with you while you're having sex. And so my ex would get very anxious, like, oh, this book, is it like considered a holy book if it has the name of God in it? Or if it's whatever it is, he would like get very anxious about stuff like that. There's a rule about it being really dark in the room. And so like if there was even a drop of light coming through the window or like the alarm clock light, he would get very anxious about that. There was a special prayer that he wanted us both to recite before sex to like ask God to have righteous sons from this act that we're about to do. There's so many just like things attached to it. And then also specific to the wedding night, because both of us didn't know what we were doing. And it was our first time, and we had just only ever just learned about it from some teacher. There's a lot of anxiety of like, did we actually do it? Did it like go inside? Did it properly penetrate? Is this considered like we consummated it? And we didn't know. And I just remember like on the wedding night, like at 3 a.m. after a full night of like the wedding and people and dancing and going home to our apartment and doing this horrible, and then my ex calling the rabbi to be like, how do I know if we did it right? Do we like, is it okay? And that was like another layer of like just incredible stress and also like the involvement of the rabbi into kind of this personal thing was another traumatic piece to all of it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel uncomfortable just hearing the stories, and I'm sure you feel uncomfortable, and I'm sure everyone listening is like, oh, this isn't very comfy. But the reason that I wanted to ask more about the details is because I do think it's important to paint the full picture of what you went through to accurately depict this lifestyle and how far you've come, and just the differences that these different groups have. I think it's just important to, I guess, share the knowledge and allow people to fully understand it. So thank you for being so vulnerable and transparent about that. So you have children, so you did eventually figure out how to do it right. Did it become easier for you? Were you still grappling with your sexuality and trying to force something to work with your husband? What was that like as time went on?
It didn't become easier for me. And I'm now like very conscious. Like we've been talking a lot about really intense stuff. So just so the audience knows, I can also talk about cute and funny stuff. But just to focus for a moment, it did not get easier. It was horrible. It actually increasingly got worse and worse for me. I still didn't connect it to my sexuality until I went to see a therapist who like my family sent me to. He was a Hasidic like man who was a therapist, a licensed therapist in the community. And he asked me like, so his question was like, how do you know? Or actually I told him, I don't love my husband is how it started. And he asked me, how do you know what love is? And I said, I've been in love before with this girl in my high school. And he said, oh, so do you think you might be a lesbian? And I said, what's that? And then he explained it to me. And, for me, that was the beginning of me like understanding that there is a correlation between my attraction to women and my lack of attraction to my husband. But it kind of came from the lens of like, I need to figure out how to no longer be a lesbian so I can be a good wife and do what I need to do with my husband.
From your therapist's point of view, I mean, he knew what lesbians were, but you mentioned that it wasn't really a thing in your religion as far as understanding that first women have sexuality and sex drives, and then understanding that it's possible for women to be attracted to women. Was it seen as something that they tried to make you feel ashamed about as they would with men? Or was it kind of like, just get over yourself? Like, what was he telling you to do to get rid of this side of you that you were just now discovering?
The way he framed it was that, this is an unhealthy reaction to some trauma I must have experienced as a child. And he had me, and he wanted me to like dig back into my childhood and find the time where I was, inappropriately touched or hurt or something. And then once we heal that, I can then be free from that demon, is kind of the way it was framed. And I tried. I was like hopeful that I'll figure this out and fix it and then I can move on, but I couldn't figure it out. And he did like a kind of hypnotherapy on me in an effort to get me to somehow find that trauma from my childhood. And that didn't work. And he also taught me to self-hypnotize so that I can kind of be absent from when I was having sex with my husband. And that was traumatic in its own right.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're just completely dissociating from your body. And sex, especially for women, is such an emotional thing. And to even be ready to accept a man, you have to be aroused and you have to be connected to your body and you have to be willing and wanting it. So I can't imagine how difficult that must have been. How long did this go on before you realized you wanted to leave the community and find something that worked for you?
So I stayed in the marriage for 7.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And you know, I saw this therapist, and then when after a while he said he can't help me much more. And then I was sent to this other therapist, and then we did couples counseling, we did rabbis, leader, everybody was in our marriage. And I really, really wanted to just make it work. It felt like there was no other option for me, really. It was, I needed to figure this out and stay in it. And I had 3 children. And I finally, you know, the last year I was done and I knew it. And what I'm really grateful for is that there was this one therapist that I saw. My parents like flew him in from Israel because he was supposed to be the guru who fixes marriages. And I remember, you know, meeting with him, and he told me, you don't want to fix this, and I can't make you fix it if that's not what you actually want. You want to leave.
Yeah.
And the best, I mean, honestly, that was such a gift that he gave me, because he said, what you need to do is spend some time in therapy for yourself, because it's going to be a hell of a battle to leave this. Like he knew my ex-husband's family, and he's like, they're not going to let you go easy. They're going to make it, they're going to make it hard. And so you got to strengthen yourself and get some tools to cope with that. And I did. I spent another year in therapy, but now with a focus on really like, how do I get there myself? That therapist wasn't great. You know, she told me like, you're going to lose your children if you leave this marriage. You know, she was also someone in the community, and she was giving me the hard truth. Like, she's like, this is going to be really bad. But at that point, I knew I needed to do it. And what's interesting is, you know, I had been talking about divorce from the beginning of the marriage. You know, day one, my husband and I were talking about divorce.
Wow.
Yeah, we both were so unhappy the whole entire time, so disconnected from each other, just like 2 ships in the sea, just going our own ways. And as you know, as I was building up some like stamina to leave, I think, you know, he started realizing like, oh, this is serious. Ultimately, he left me, which was a gift, because I don't know how I could have taken it to that step. But yeah, eventually. So when I was 25 years old, I got divorced. I had 3 young children who were 1, 3, and 5 years old.
How did you, there's so many questions I have. I don't even know where to begin. Like, you are 25, 3 children, basically toddlers, and you're alone and you're still isolated within this community that you don't want to be a part of. How did you manage? How did you get a job? Like, what? How? I don't even know how to say it. How?
Good question. How?
Yeah.
So a thing that you should understand is that while I was married, I was also the breadwinner of our family. And this is the case in a lot of Hasidic communities. Not all, but in many Hasidic communities, the women are the people who go to work. The men study Torah. The men are just studying Torah all day. Yeah. So I was working the entire time and continued to work after the divorce. I felt so relieved in that early, like the beginning of like that new chapter after my husband left, and all of a sudden I was like, it's just me and these three babies. Like, we can do this. And it was like a heavy weight was lifted off my shoulders. I didn't feel like anything was harder because of him leaving. Like, on the contrary, I felt so much lighter and freer. It was the first time in my life that there wasn't a man who is my father or my husband controlling me and telling me what I needed to do. And
Yeah.
I think because also this is part of like growing up as a woman in the community. It's like you're trained since you're little for motherhood. That's like a thing that, you know, you're expected to really like get good at. And I shaped my whole identity around that. And that's something I'm grateful for as a person who has children, that like my immediate instinct after that divorce was just like, I'm going to make this life so good for these children. And there's something like also specific to me, which is, you know, my name is Chava. I'm called Chavie, but the name is Chava. Chava is the name of, you know, Eve, Adam and Eve. It's the Hebrew word for Eve. And the Torah explains, why did Adam name his wife Chava? And the answer is, for she was the mother of all life. And from when I was little, that was like the little nickname that my father would always, you know, joke around about. Oh, look at our mother of all life, you know. And so I actually have it tattooed on myself. I don't know if you can
beautiful.
see it, but yeah, I have it, you know, there with my children's birthdays. First tattoo I got when I left the community. Tattoos are forbidden. All this to say, it was an instinct for me that I'm going to do this really well. And it was easier to do without having to get permission from some man for every decision I was making. And, everything became for me a lot more, thoughtful. And I was really thinking about, what do I want as a parent? How do I want to raise these children? Who are we as a family? Which led me on this little journey of like exploring my sexuality more, trying to reconcile my sexuality and my religious identity, and ultimately realizing that I can't. And that's when it became obvious. I need to leave, and I need to take these children with me and live an authentic life with these babies.
Yeah. What did your husband or your ex-husband think about that?
So, after I got divorced, my ex-husband remarried very quickly after. 4 months later, he was married to another woman.
Wow, 4 months.
Yeah. It was fast. And she didn't have any children of her own at that time. And so he, for some reason, was guided by his rabbis that he needs to focus on his new marriage and not complicate things by seeing his children. And so he really like stepped out of our life and was not very present. Little visits here and there, but really very, very minimal. So like for 4.5 years after the divorce, you know, he was just not in the picture. And so when I left the community, I thought, you know, I've seen other people leave and the horrible reaction that the community has to them. But I thought my case would be different because my ex was so uninvolved that I thought like he had no standing, even if he tried to like do something to harm my relationship with the children. I was wrong. When I left the community, the first day I, you know, left my apartment without my wig on and in jeans. It was immediate. Like I was going to a doctor's appointment. I went to the doctor's appointment. I came home. By the time I came home, the whole entire community knew about this terrible thing that I did, which, you know, leave my apartment in jeans and without my head covered. And, and the reaction was swift. It was, we're going to take your children away from you. And by we, it was not just my ex-husband. It was a concerted effort by the entire community. So like they moved into quick action. They had hired him the best lawyers. They had a whole case built against me. And very quickly, the court ordered that my children be removed from my care and go to live with their father.
Wow, that I just can't even imagine. Just the complete shock. And the reason is because you did something as simple as going out in jeans, and it scared them into thinking that you were leading your children down the wrong path. And now your children are taking, I mean, what's going through your mind? Are you regretting your decisions? How were you able to fight back against that?
So I never regretted my decisions. It was so clear to me at that point. It was years in the making. I knew I needed to do
Yeah.
this. And thank goodness the instinct to just fight like hell kicked in. I was not
Yeah.
going to like take the sitting down. I was going to do everything in my power to have a meaningful relationship with my children and give them the opportunity to leave the community as well, to have a future outside of the community. It was just very clear to me that I needed to do everything in my power to get there. And I was really lucky because people rallied behind me. You know, my new community of friends and some wonderful nonprofits. Like I reached out to a nonprofit called Her Justice. Well, actually, I reached out to an organization called Unchained at Last, and they connected me with Her Justice. And Her Justice gave me a pro bono attorney who turned out to be like angels. Like they were a big firm, so they were actually able to like support me through like all the pieces. I don't know how much your audience knows about just what the legal process is like, and it's horrible. I hope nobody has to go through it. But it's a lot. It's years and years and years of fighting. And so just to be clear, like the judge ordered immediately that the children be removed from my care. And then a week later, I got attorneys who represented me. And so the children, we came up with like this temporary order or this temporary decision, like while the custody case is being played out, the children were my ex-husband was to have primary custody and the children would have visitation with me for 3 days a week. My ex was fighting for me to have only supervised visitation so that I can't, tell them anything or expose them to anything of my values or thoughts while they're with me. And thankfully that there was like a stay on that, the supervision part. And the judge said, like, when we get to the end of the hearing or the trial, then he'll determine that. So just for those, I think it was like 4 years that this case dragged on. And during that time, the children spent, Thursday after school till Monday morning with their dad, and then they would come to me Monday through Thursday. And I had these 3 precious days a week with my children. I was legally not allowed to share anything of myself with my children, like none of my values, none of my ideas, none of my, like anything about my sexuality.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And also, it's even crazier that the judge also included in there that even when my children are not with me, that while I'm in the Hasidic neighborhood, I need to show up like a Hasidic person.
No.
I wasn't allowed to leave my house in the clothes I wanted to wear. I wasn't allowed to, like if I wanted to travel on the weekend, which is like the Sabbath, I wasn't allowed to. So I would have to like walk outside of the neighborhood and take the train from there or get a cab from there. But I was like a prisoner in my own community for years.
Wow, that must have been awful because you finally gain this freedom and this independence and you're happy and you're thriving, and then you're thrown right back into 4 more years of being controlled again and also not having your children. I'm sure you don't want to speak for them specifically, but what were their responses to this back and forth? That must have been really difficult for them going 3 days on and then 4 days with their dad.
It was awful. Honestly, it's such a traumatic time for like in the grand scheme of all of our lives. I think now that my children are, some of them adults already and one almost an adult, there's, it's a lot to process and a lot to unpack. Like at the time, it was just survival. We pushed through. I was putting on that brave face every time they would come home on Monday. And I had like, prepared projects and treats for them and to help with that transition from, their father's house to home. And
yeah,
it just was awful. And a big piece for me as well was this terrible fear that they're being brainwashed against me,
Right.
which they were, not an unfounded fear. They were being told that everything I stand for and everything I value was evil and bad. And
Ugh.
I know so many people like myself whose children turned against them, whose children remained in the community and refused to like respect their parent who was no longer of the faith. And I was so scared of that happening. But I also had this legal muzzle, which like
Yeah.
didn't allow me to talk to my kids and help them kind of understand the things that I believed and the ideas and the values and all the things that I cared about. And I mean, I did some creative shenanigans to try to like get around the legal barriers and still be able to like deconstruct some of these like ideas that they were being taught in school and at their father's home.
Like what?
One of the things I did was I created a family values wall. And so anytime we would like read a book or watch a movie or whatever it was, and we would like notice a value that was being expressed, and it was something that aligned with the values I wanted them to have, we would draw it out on a paper and stick it onto our family values wall.
Aww.
Yeah. And this was one of the ways that it was like, because up until then, there was just like a clear book of God's, rules of what morality is and what's right and wrong. And I wanted to like kind of break those apart and analyze what are actually values that we are aligned with. And, some of these were things that like are just, not anti-Hasidism, I suppose, like, which means I wasn't straight up saying Hasidic values are bad. These are good values. I was saying these are our family's values. This is what we care about. And they were, some of them, different than what they were being taught. There was, anti-racism and inclusivity and, things like that were not being taught in other places. And we constantly would go back to them. It was almost like this thing that like became integrated into our day-to-day life.
I can't imagine how difficult that must have been, because were you forced to also continue what they were doing at their father's house in your home? You said you were watching movies, and earlier you said that you weren't really allowed, or you had very strict rules around movies. So were they kind of going to you and doing things that they wouldn't have been able to do at their dad's house?
Technically, no. I was not allowed to do those things that they were not allowed to do at their father's house. There were some things, and I don't want to like get myself into legal trouble here. I found some workarounds and figured out ways to still be able to share things of value with me. And there was a concern always that the kids would go and tell their dad, and that would be used against me. And so I was careful about the things that I chose to share with them or why I'm sharing it with them. And everything had like, a thought, like I was very responsible and careful about that. Like, is it worth it? Am I taking a risk that's worth it?
Right.
But one of the things I did was like, and this is, if any of your listeners are trying to deconstruct their children or trying to help their children understand the larger world we live in, while also them being, for whatever reason, in Hasidic schools or in fundamentalist spaces and not having access, one of the things I did was I would curate these little like playlists of videos. I would do this through Facebook. So like anytime I would see something on Facebook that like was like a current events or something values based or just something cute, I would save those links in my Facebook. I don't know if like this is so past, it's so long ago. And then like at dinner every night, we would have this little like show. I would show them all the little videos that I had curated over the weekend while they were away. And it was like a way to kind of give them bits of the larger world and share with them the things that are important. And again, like deconstruct some of those problematic ideas. And we would discuss it, and, and it was fun and it was light, and there was a cute kid and a puppy. And then there was also just like, here's what's happening in politics and here's what's happening in, so it was a full-time job figuring out how to give these children a core sense of identity that aligned with the values I wanted them to have, while still being really careful about not getting in trouble with the courts.
Wow. I just want to give you a virtual applause here because that is amazing. You are amazing for doing all of that for your children. Honestly, I don't know if every child in that situation could have been so lucky to have a parent who put so much time and effort into helping them become well-rounded adults. And I think what most of us, at least I'm very curious about knowing, is what were their reactions when you were finally able to tell them, oh, geez, this is what's been going on, and this is what I've been wanting to tell you about, and this is who I am?
It was a slow process. I didn't just like burst it all out like that. It was, and there's still things that are coming out now. It's like, it was their whole entire lives. And there's a lot to unpack, and we're still unpacking it. A lot of therapy for all of us, honestly, just a lot of therapy. But we're healing, we're healing, we're learning about it. Ultimately, where they are now is just grateful that I saved them from that experience. They're, just always expressing that. It's so constant. It's always right underneath the surface of our lives of like, my eldest kid turned 20 last month. At 20, I was pregnant with them.
Wow.
Married to a stranger. I'm pregnant with them, and they're going to college and, having their first relationships and learning about, what their interests are, and not forced into a marriage and having a baby. And so like these things just are constantly bubbling right under the surface they're just so grateful that they're getting to just be people in the world and learn and figure out their own truths and live by their own value systems and not feel restricted to a very limited life.
Yeah. Wow, it's incredible that they were able to understand where you were coming from and see it from your perspective. And I'm sure, they're grateful to you for that. And do they still have a good relationship with their father as well?
They're working on it. They actually have like court-ordered family therapy with their dad. And so that's really helping them to kind of confront some of the pieces that didn't feel good for them and to talk it out. And there's healing happening all around.
Yeah. Oh man, my heart is just it's like full and it's heavy and it's like, I need to take a few deep breaths. I'm a little emotional over here. It has just been such a ride to experience your story and to hear how you came out of this on top. I feel like that's an accurate statement, right? Do you feel liberated and happy? And how are you now?
I feel so liberated and so happy. You're asking me in the right moment. I turned 40 this year.
Oh my gosh.
I got engaged to the person I love so much this year.
Congrats.
Thank you. And I'm about to go this summer. I'm taking a 3-month sabbatical from my job, which I'm just so grateful that my job offers that. And so I've been working there for 7 years. And so now I get this paid sabbatical, and I'm just excited to like use that time to heal and to learn more about myself and to figure out like what's this next chapter going to be. Looking into like different healing retreats and, writing workshops. Maybe I want to write a book.
Yes, please do.
I would like to, or maybe I'll get a ghostwriter. I don't know. We'll see. But I'm excited at, it feels like it's finally over. The worst of it is behind us. And now the healing can begin. I mean, the healing has been happening all along too, but it feels better. And like there's just only the good times now. My friend always likes to say, like, now is the time for prizes. We get the treats now. We've done all the hard stuff and we get the treats. So
yes, you have definitely earned it. And in that spirit, I need to get your Linda listen moment, your sassy statement as the viral video with the toddler goes, something that you want to say to someone or an organization, or it can be inspirational for our viewers here.
Linda, listen. It's hard to imagine a big, beautiful, magical life while you're still in one that is so restrictive and controlling of information. So dream big. Look at somebody in the world that you're like, oh, wow, they're living this incredible life, and make that yours because you freaking can.
Yes.
Because there's nothing actually in the way. You can live the biggest, boldest, free life that you imagine for yourself, and everything that's standing in the way now can be taken care of, can be removed. And I'm not trying to do this toxic positivity thing. It's going to be awful. The process is going to be terrible. But when you get there, it's going to be so, so good. So it's worth it. Do the hard thing. You deserve the big, beautiful life.
Oh, I love that. Linda, listen, do the hard thing because it's worth it. Thank you so much for sharing. It has been such a ride, as I've mentioned before. I just can't thank you enough. Would you like to include any social media handles or resources? Totally up to you.
Thank you. Yes. I would like to encourage folks to donate to Footsteps. Footsteps is the nonprofit that supports people like myself. Disclaimer, I work there, but it's good work and it's important. Donate to Footsteps. If you need to leave the Hasidic community, reach out to Footsteps. It's footstepsorg.org. And regarding me, I want to do better about social media, but find me, I don't know, on Facebook or Instagram. And if you message me something meaningful, I'll probably accept your request.
Awesome. We'll put the links down below for anyone who wants to get in touch. Any final thoughts before we go?
I'm just so grateful I got to have this conversation with you today, and I'm so proud of the work you're doing. You're such an inspirational person, and
Aww.
I just hope everybody gets to live their best lives.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And to everyone listening, if you'd like to support the podcast, that would mean the world. You can support over on Patreon, patreon.com/cults to consciousness. We're having behind the scenes conversations and news updates, exclusive updates. And until next time, follow your highest excitement to be conscious and be well. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, it would mean a lot if you could like and subscribe on YouTube and leave a review or a comment to help with our visibility. You can also find me on social media at cults2consciousness or reach out by email at cults2consciousness@gmail.com.